What's up, YouTube? Today we are going to go over how I painted the Joaquin Phoenix version of the Joker right here.
Well, that's a heck of a start to a picture.
Hey guys, I'm Bill Kennedy with W. Leon Artistry. If you're new to our channel, hey, this is what we're all about, is helping artists learn to grow. But anyway, this is a hot topic right now. I know that Karsten over at the Airbrush Asylum is currently running the series on this, so I'll leave you a link down below. You can go check out Karsten. He's always got good tutorials. I haven't seen it myself, but I don't have a lot of time to watch tutorials on YouTube, believe it or not. But I probably will get by there. And anyway, I'm going to get to rolling. We're going to get working on this. Let's do it. All right, so my first mix here is burnt sienna and blue violet, and then that is just a very, very tiny amount. And then that is mixed with white to lighten it quite a bit, and we're going to put the base of the hair in. We want that to be a little bit fuzzy, so of course we're going to freehand it. I'm putting this in first so that the hair can lay on top of it and the hair can play that little bit of peekaboo on there. Added a little bit more red violet to that just to tone it up a little bit, and then we darken that mix a little bit. Now we're going to come in here and start laying in the hair, and that color is actually got viridian green and cobalt blue, and then it is mixed with black for that dark color that you see here. And what I want you guys to pay attention to is how simple it really is if you just pay attention to the major shapes of the hair. You'll see I'm going in here just creating random shapes. The only things that really matter are the sections where the green hair shines through, which we're going to go over later. Notice how, aside from that, notice how I'm creating a bunch of random shapes in the background. And those random shapes will allow it just to create a little bit of realism, even though it's very dark. It's not so dark that you can't make out little bitty shapes. Your eye will pick up on those little bitty shapes. Coming in and freehanding up along that face, because later on that face, we're going to bring the makeup into it. That edge is just a little bit fuzzy there, so we want to be able to come out into that edge over the top of the hair. You'll notice that I'm putting in major shapes, and then I'll put in just a handful of small stray hairs in here, which is really all you're going to need where they're going over the ear. And a couple little spots. Notice how I'm leaving little gaps in there, and that allows that ear to, peekaboo in and out. And everything I'm doing here is very, very simple. It's few daggers, a few curly type strokes that tail off into slight daggers, and then as you can see right there, as I'm putting just some stray hairs, because your stray hairs will be darker over a dark or a light background, which the ear is a light background. And that's pretty much all there is to it. You get those lines in there. Now I'm going to come in with a mix. It is viridian and cerulean blue. And I might have toned that down with just a little bit of red. I cannot remember off the top of my head. And I added a tiny little bit of white just to give it a little more opacity. And you'll see how I come in here and put some strokes in, and that green will come in on top of some of those black spots there. And then I'm just blending out the edge of the spots that I left. And then I'm going to come back in with my darker mix again and just touch a few things in there and add some finer strokes and details. That same darker mix, which is a really dark bluish green, is what I'm using for my dark mix here. The reason I'm using that shield is, see, this eye is, you can take this and break this down into two parts. You got this nice crisp line that comes across here, and then this rolls out into a violetish brown color underneath as where the eyelid rolls over, but you got that sharp break, and that's why I'm using a shield to get that sharp edge now. And I know that looks black on the screen, but it is not. Payne's Gray would have worked okay on this. It would have turned out all right. If you use Payne's Gray, instead of having to mix up a color, I just mixed up a color that was going to not clash with the blue, the greenish bluish look from the makeup that's around it. So knowing that wouldn't clash, I mixed up that cerulean blue and viridian green, and that gave me the And then, of course, I added black to it. That gave me that really nice dark mix that looks black on the screen right now, but it does have a little bit of that cool color to it. And as you can see, I used my tracing paper as a shield. I use tracing paper quite often if I have a painting that I'm worried about needing to possibly have to catch the image back or draw it back out again. It's much easier to align, or the whole taping it up and leaving it taped to there where you got to make a hinge. I like to have tracing paper because I can always come back and find my reference in my spots later, and it's not in my way getting blown around. You'll see I'm putting some tiny little details into the eye. That's basically, I'm doing a little figure 8 pattern in there in the eye. And then I'm going to add a few little textures with a dot texture stencil later to create some more. Just deepening it in. There's where I bring out that texture stencil. And that's actually Tommy Hand skin stencil. You guys don't need to buy stencils. You can make stencils on your own. On this particular picture, I'm going to make extensive use of freehand shields that are texture shields. And you can make them out of paper. I have a video on how to make your own texture shields. I use some of my own in this one. I use some of Tommy Ham's in this one. And, of course, you can buy others. There's many, many, many different types of texture shields out there. Just make sure we come in. Now, what I've done after I've blended that in, what I'm doing right now is pulling out the eyelashes. The eyelashes are coming across. And, of course, because they're on a dark background, they are going to appear lighter. We'll do some more work with that later. Then you can see I'm just running that edge around for that crease that is over the top of the eyelid. My line's not real crisp and clean right there. And then in other places, I am forcing my lines to be spotty. So you'll see me now create a crisp line in there and run across that just to deepen in that crease. But I didn't get too worried about it. Notice the color. Well, I'm mixing it now. If this is pretty much in real time, nothing in here is sped up more than 2 times speed. So notice that I'm not just making straight blends here. I'm creating texture with my airbrush as I go along. See how I'm pumping my airbrush? If you look at my finger on the airbrush over there, you can see how I'm opening and closing my airbrush. The air stays on all the time, but I'm creating textures the whole time that I'm working with this, because that whole section is full of texture. And then, of course, I'm going to take a pencil eraser and erase a little bit out. Same thing over here, how those edge off that crease of that eyelid is blending out, but it blends out and there's eyelashes and stuff. We're just kind of making some rough textures there that'll create some effect. And then you'll see that I'm coming in here on the left hand side. Notice I'm not trying to pull any lines here. We're just doing some very gentle blending and shading. We're going a little heavier than we will later, because later we're going to need a lot more subtle look than what we have now. But for now, we're just putting some base layer in. It's got to go a lot darker than that.
Let's get these bushy eyebrows in. This guy really needs to do some manscaping.
And then you saw me take my fiberglass scratch pen and cut out some more textures on the eyelid. Now I'm coming up here to the eyebrow, and see that I'm throwing just a bunch of dots, rough textures. Same thing as the hair. I'm putting in some background textures. There'll be some daggers in there, and then you'll see me pull in some smaller, finer lines. But right now, I'm creating a lot of random shapes behind it, because if you look at your reference, that it is mainly very dark and almost devoid of being able to see, because there's makeup on top of it. But you want some texture going on in the background. Even though it's very dark, you want some texture, and that'll help create the depth without having to go in here and scratch out multiple times. So, I mean, I will do some scratching on this, and I'll be pulling out eyebrows. You'll see me do that. But having all this background texture in there, a couple layers of done with the airbrush, will save me a load of time later trying to create some realism. And with those shapes, I mean, I'm just paying attention to the shapes in the eyebrow. I'm not following the exact lines. You'll see that I didn't even draw them in there. When I paint, generally speaking, I don't draw in every single crease and line. I just look at my picture and kind of replicate that um, closely, but I don't even try to be perfect with it. And sometimes I might even change the actual picture up. All right, guys, on this next section, you're going to see me use a stippling effect. That's where you take and turn the pressure down in your airbrush, and when you spray it, it blows out tiny little dots. You can adjust that. So you're going to see me use that here, and then you're going to see me work a lot of this picture before I come back and do any of my scratching or erasing. But be cautious with that. I work pretty fast, so I tend to work a lot of my picture. But if you let the paint sit on there very long, it's going to be harder to scratch and erase. Actually, if you immediately erase while the paint is just barely hit the surface, just been on the surface for a second, you could scratch back to white very quickly and easily. All right, so there is the stippling effect. If you guys do any of this, before you do it on your painting, make sure that you test it out, off on a side scrap piece of paper before you just start throwing those stipples. And depending on how you work that, it will depend on the size of the droplets that you can get. In this case, I wasn't worried about it for any of my larger droplets and pores and stuff. I just wanted it for just a whole bunch of those micro dots. It's just easy way to get them in there, and I'm going to be doing some erasing on top of that and creating texture off of it, so most of that will get buried, but it does create that all them pores in the background that even if you don't see them at the end stage of the picture, they're there and your eye picks up on it. It makes the difference between whether the painting looks kind of real or not. Then I'm also using the my Tommy hand skin stencil. Notice what I'm doing here is I am moving that stencil side to side, and I'm spraying, kind of making a circular pattern, and notice the difference in that texture that it creates versus just using the stencil straight. And you can do that, play with dragging stencils around like that and spraying lightly and create a lot of cool textures. As a matter of fact, you can, by using a skin stencil like that, spraying that, you can get that female skin that's not that rough, using a texture stencil like that. And then just going to continue in here, darkening in as I go along. You'll see me, this is all real time right now, so this is actually how fast I'm working. I'm just kind of paying attention to my picture, looking at my picture, deciding where I need to get darker. Obviously using a micro dot stencil right there to add some even bigger dots than the dots that were in the stippling. And continuing to add all those little pores, dots, and things that exist in the skin. There's a lot of them going on. Joaquin, dude, moisturizer. All right, you'll see me right there. I'm doing some soft erasing where I felt like the values were a little bit too dark, just from the stippling and the texture stencil. Then I'm going to come in. I'm going to start pulling out some of the hairs for the eyebrows. Then I'm using a aggressive pencil eraser, which is just a typewriter eraser. Those are a little bit harder to find nowadays, but actually you can get a line on those, considering getting a bulk buy in on those here again pretty soon. So you're going to see me put in some really, really small hairs in the back, and then you're going to see me drag out some long ones. And of course, I'm going to work on some texture in the skin and paying attention to that transition between the skin over the brow and going into the eyebrow. And then you'll see me as I start to paint. You'll notice I don't just lay paint in straight and then scratch and erase it all out. I actually work in patterns that are similar in directions of flow. You can just lay paint straight down and scratch, lay paint down, scratch, and lay paint down and scratch, but that might be a little bit slower than the way that I work at it. I try to get through these paintings fairly quick. Of course, I don't necessarily aspire to try to make a completely photoreal painting. I just want something that's pretty realistic, and I make some changes and do some things different in the picture. Um, you know, so 100% accuracy is not necessarily my goal, although I want it to be accurate enough. And I think in most cases, most people don't really care if it's 100% accurate or not. All right, going to speed up a little bit of this for some of these next sections, so you don't have to watch me duplicate the same stuff over and over again. You'll see I'm coming in here, and I'm going to do some freehand work, put in a lot of dots, especially some of the bigger dots, and then you're going to see me also use dot stencil, and then you're going to see me use some of my free homemade stencils, and a little bit of stippling work on the left hand side. So that's one of my homemade stencils right there, where I wanted a bunch of pore like textures. Another one of my homemade stencils right there, where I wanted a bunch of tighter, darker stencils right there, and then work a little bit off the edge. And you saw me, of course, freehand in some dots here and there. And I want to start blending and shading out, and then I'm going to come back in and do a little bit of soft erasing. The soft erasing, I do that. I put them pores in there, and then I'm gonna, with the soft erasing, using the backside of a number 2 pencil eraser, I'm working that by kind of scribbling those lines. So I'm working like in a figure 8 or a random scribbling motion. So I'm not trying to go back and forth and back and forth. I am making it very random, and just going to create a mottled effect in the background. And of course, I'm using the little mini dot stencil from Tommy Ham right there. I'm using that a whole lot. Of course, you saw me do a little bit of line work, created some of that crease work by some tight line work. And then you see me right there. You saw I did a little bit of stippling work, and then you see I did some of that dragging with that stencil back and forth. I'm going to slow that down in a moment in another section of the painting and show you exactly how that dragging works out. Notice when I'm working in like that, and that I'm not just like going in there and hammering that spraying on. In there, you'll notice I start pretty soon. You'll notice I start putting, being very attentional. The further along I get with the picture on where I put those highlights, I'll start like if I'm next to a big pore like that, I know there's going to be a highlight depending on where my light source comes from. Well, actually, it's to the bottom left hand side. In this current picture, the lighting is coming from your right hand side of the picture, just slightly. It's not a very, very harsh light, but there still are, the reflections are coming from your right to the left. So the light's coming from your right to the left. So your highlights on like pores and stuff will catch on the left hand, bottom left hand side. You see, I used the X-Acto knife there for some of my eyebrow work. Important to note with the X-Acto knife, depending on the direction you turn your X-Acto knife, whether you use the back of the X-Acto knife, whether you use, oh, that was a little repair right there. But anyway, with the X-Acto knife, depending on the direction you turn it, whether you use the back of the X-Acto knife, the tip edge of the X-Acto knife, or lay it down to scrape, will affect how wide your line width are and how it works. Sometimes, depending on how sharp your X-Acto blade, it won't work very well or drag and cut very well with one direction. I find quite often the back is a little bit safer bet when you use the back side of the X-Acto knife instead of using the side with the sharp edge on it. But if you want stronger, bolder scratching, to go to that side, it'll create a stronger and bolder scratch. You see me working off the side of my texture shield right there. And that's kind of spraying off of that and then creating some of those lines. You see I'm using the stipple effect again right there. And then you're going to see me randomly go in here with kind of a figure 8 motion in places. And then, of course, using the dot shields and using my freehand shields that I made for my textured freehand shields here and there. using the edge of that texture stencil to create a crisper edge, but with a lot of character to it. And I'll be using that actually more in this painting. Just using the little tiny spots of that edge just to create some lines. Now I slowed this down right here. I wanted you to see when I'm talking about dragging those stencils like that. That's what I'm doing right there. In this particular case, I didn't circle out my airbrush, so those are more like some streaky lines, and it might not show up very well in the video, but it is definitely something that you can notice an effect in the picture. You can see those little lines and stuff. They do show up. Obviously, depending on how good of a picture I get and whether the video, what the quality of the video is, whether you'll be able to see that or not. But it's definitely an effect. You can see the difference without and with. It's just those minor little things that are, create that little dose of reality. And then I'm going to work in here around that nose, coming up the bridge, and make sure we don't go in there. And I'm staying off, of course, the part of the eye that's going to be getting coloring going in there. And on this right side of that cheek, you're going to see me obviously freehand some line work in there. You're going to see me use my microdot stencil, and you're going to see me do some stippling, but it's all a little bit larger scale than what's over there by the nose. And that's going to go in pretty fast with these rough and general guidelines here. So basically nothing much I'm doing is different. Doing a little bit more dot work freehand than I was doing in some of the other places. You see me watch them in there, and notice how some of those creases are a small series of dots connected instead of straight up creases. So you'll see me put some of those in there like that. Freehand is probably the easiest way to go with that. Gonna start racing out. Notice how I get that edge just a little bit fuzzy. We talked about that in the beginning. I got the edge a little bit fuzzy on the right.
All right, guys, that's how we got it. Oh, did I miss a few things? Well, yeah, there's going to be a part 2. Guys, I'll have a part 2 for this out. I think I'll release that on Tuesday. I already have all the recording done for it. I just got to do a lot of overdubs with it and explain my processes. So we should be able to get that out Tuesday. Once again, we appreciate you coming by. If you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up. Hit the share button for me, would you? If you've not subscribed yet, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. So, and if you don't like the video, as I always say, you can always, give me the other thumb, and that'll be all right, too. You won't hurt my feelings. But we appreciate you guys coming by. Thanks a lot. We'll see you guys on Tuesday. Bye.